أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. Last week, alhamdulillah, we completed the several ayat of the Surah Al-Hujurat, which spoke about etiquette and had many different kinds of etiquettes, different kinds of social etiquettes that we must observe to keep the fabric of unity in the Muslim community. And Allah Ta'ala tells us of several things, different things, that do not do these things, don't do this and don't do that, for the reason that this will surely break unity, this will surely break the community. So stay away from these things, stay away from these habits. Let's start from the last ayah. Allah Ta'ala said, O you who believe, shun much suspicion, for indeed certain kinds of suspicion are sinful. Nor shall you spy on each other, nor shall you backbite one another. Would any of you like to eat his dead brother's flesh? You would most surely dislike it. So fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is all relenting and mercy giving. And the ayah, the scholars as they mention, that these actions are a cycle. So when the first happens, which is that it starts off as a suspicion, as a bad thought, a person will have an evil suspicion about someone, and then they will go and try to find out more about the suspicion. See, is that suspicion a reality? This is why the Messenger said, إِذَا ظَنَنْتَ فَلَا تُحَقِّقْهُ. If you have a thought about someone or about something, a suspicion, then do not try to make it a reality. Do not try to make it a reality. And this is the problem, that when the intention is wrong, or when the heart is polluted, then when bad thoughts come, the heart desires that those thoughts are true. Whereas a pure heart will shun away those suspicions, will understand that those are suspicions coming from, inspired from the nafs or inspired from the shaitan. So that person will shun those suspicions away. As the Messenger of Allah said, and the believer will morph their thoughts to be good. ظُنُّوا بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ خَيْرًا. Make your thoughts good about the believers. Think good about the believers. And when a person, if they indulge in this act, then it will slowly but surely put them to the next step, which is وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. And then do not spy on each other. Do not spy on each other. People should not spy on others in the community. People should not spy on others in the household. People should not spying on another person, no matter what state of authority, no matter what position the person has. It's not a good habit. It's not a good habit. Knowing the affairs of people, as the Messenger of Allah would know the affairs of the Muslim community, knowing the affairs of the Muslim community without actively pursuing to know about the faults of people is different. That is allowed, of course, to know the affairs of your household, know the affairs of those under you, know the affairs of your students, your children. However, but to spy and to vigorously search for a negative, something negative and a fault, that's known as tajassus. And this is, bil-umum, this is generally, in all cases, wrong. وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. And then after your eye has opened to you a fault of another person, do not talk about it. Ghiba. Do not backbite another person. And what is the reality? The reality of backbiting is that it's not when you think someone is wrong, or when you don't see something but perhaps you assume that a person is wrong. It's when you know a person is wrong. This is the false kind of dilemma that shaitan tries to give to a person, that, oh, you know what, you saw this person doing wrong, you should talk about it. You should tell other people. Sometimes shaitan comes in the form of a da'i, a form of a person of da'wah, and will come to you and tell you, oh, you know what, you know this person was talking wrong, or saying wrong, or doing something wrong, go tell other people. That's a false idea. That's the reality of what riba is. You know someone did something wrong, or is doing something wrong, or they're indulging in something, and then you talk about it. And if you don't know and you spread a rumor, then that's slander, and that's even greater, as the Messenger of Allah said. That is buhtan, and that is even worse. But ghiba, the Messenger of Allah disliked it so much so that he said it is worse than zina. Why? Because the same way zina breaks the fabric of community, it breaks a family, it breaks social rules. What is zina? If you look at it, what is it? It's perpetrating hurma, sacredness of people, that which is supposed to be protected. Likewise with riba. You are indulging in a person's fault is their aura. That is their private area. That should not be spoken about. That should not be open to the people, right? In riba, a person is acting in several of these kind of ways and different things. One of the scholars, right, he mentions that may Allah Ta'ala protect the masajid, of course, but he gives an example. That, we sit in the masajid, we talk in masajid, or other places, other places we come and we sit together. If we were to see in front of us adultery taking place, we would feel disgusted. But how many times riba takes place in front of us, or we're even indulging in it, and we are even in the masjid. We're pointing at people, we're laughing at someone, we're joking about someone. And perhaps that's, it falls under the category of riba. Then, what a deception that is. That we think we're protected, we're in the masjid, but look what we're indulging in. And this happens. So, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Do not, some of you should not backbite the others. Backbiting is considered from the kaba'ir, from the great sins. Now, something that we can think about here is that why is Allah Ta'ala telling us all these small different etiquettes? And why did He choose these ones in specific? And how they all have to do very much closely with the tongue, right? The attitude. Whether it was the ayah before as well, calling each other by names and lams and hums, and joking with one another. Allah Ta'ala chose. And this is one place in the Quran where you have etiquette after etiquette. This is why this is a very special surah and a very important place in the Quran. So Allah Ta'ala gives us etiquette after etiquette, and almost all of them have to do with just controlling your tongue. That just by controlling your tongue, the community can be saved. Just if a person were to control their tongue just a little bit. Just if a person were to control their tongue, Allah Ta'ala would protect the unity of the community. Allah Ta'ala would protect the hearts of the people. And that Allah Ta'ala in this surah or in other places in the Quran, He could have told us about other things on how to develop ourselves. He could tell us, don't do this economically and do this economically. Don't do this scientifically, right? All knowledge comes from Allah. Don't do this, but do it like this. But anything in the Quran that comes, do this and don't do this, it's regarding moral development, akhlaq. Now, realistically speaking, what is our vision when we see people? If we see people that live in mud houses, perhaps, but they have very good etiquettes and very good manners, and their akhlaq and their character is very good, would we consider these people very well developed people? Or do we look at the people with the jobs, the people with the positions, the people with the buildings? When our children, when we put our children up forward, what's the first thing we say? He specialized in this, and he studied this, and he has this degree. What about, and this was something at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Arabs in specific were people of adab. They were people of etiquette. That when their child would go forward, it was, look at the eloquence of his speech. Look at how he's able to speak to people eloquently. Look at his mannerisms. Look at his generosity. This was it was a different spectrum. So Allah Ta'ala is giving us usul. He's giving us foundations of human development, that no matter what era, what place, or whoever they are in what time, that these are the markings of developed people. You can have very well-developed buildings, houses, and structures, but if you're missing these core principles, then you're not developed. Then you are not a developed community. So the development of the community relies in these things that Allah Ta'ala is guiding us to, related to the moral rectification of man. And then Allah Ta'ala strikes an analogy. أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. Would any of you like to eat his dead brother's flesh? And the reality of this analogy is that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ saw people when he went on the Isra and the Mi'raj as well. And he saw people that they were forced to eat flesh of dead carcasses of humans. And those people were people who that indulged in ghibah. In this life as well, the Rasul ﷺ was showed that when two women were fasting but backbiting, and they threw up, they vomited, and when they vomited into a bowl, flesh came out. The Rasul ﷺ asked them, did you eat anything? They said, no, we were fasting. The Rasul ﷺ said to them that you fasted and stayed away from what was halal only to indulge in what is haram. So this example is a reality. Maybe in this life, ghibah doesn't manifest like that, but in another life, ghibah will manifest like that. The action will manifest like this. Wattaqullah, fear Allah. So the summary for everything mentioned before, don't do this and don't do this, the guide to all of this is ittaqullah, fear Allah. Fear Allah. Inna Allah tawwabur rahim. For surely Allah Ta'ala is tawwab. Tawwab comes from the word tawbah, right? And tawbah, just like rahmah is something that Allah, it's a quality and attribute of Allah in specific, and it's a very special type of rahmah, but it manifests in the human being as well. You see merciful people, and that's a humane form of rahmah and mercy. Likewise, tawbah is, being tawwab is a quality and name of Allah Ta'ala, but also the human being also performs tawbah. But what is the being of tawwab of Allah Ta'ala, and how is it different from when the human being performs tawbah? The name tawwab, it idealizes the idea of coming back and forth, which is what tawbah is also, right? To return back and forth. The difference is that when it manifests in the case of Allah Ta'ala, in the case of our Lord, when it manifests from Him, then it is Allah Ta'ala returning to His creation to forgive them. So when the servant performs tawbah, it's the servant turning, as befitting to the servant, returning to Allah to ask for forgiveness. And that's how the name manifests rightfully in the character of the servant. But as it being an attribute of Allah, it is Allah Ta'ala continuously giving time to His creation, returning to His creation, and forgiving His creation. Accepting, as some of the scholars will explain, tawab is Allah Ta'ala accepting the tawbah of mankind. And Rahim is the mercy giving, but specifically Rahim has to do with the dispensing of mercy, giving of mercy, spreading of mercy. And some of the scholars would say that Rahim specifically has to do with the believers. Specifically that special mercy that Allah Ta'ala shows to the believers. we'll move on to the next ayah. The next ayah now moves on to another passage. So the passage before had to do in specific with the Muslim community. And although the etiquettes that were given in the past ayat, if any community were to use them, they would benefit. And if any community were to use them, Allah Ta'ala would give them unity. But in specific, those etiquettes were told to the Muslims. Specifically, why? Because you are not supposed to only establish justice. You are not only supposed to just establish, some level of equality amongst yourselves. Rather, you're supposed to establish virtue. Muslims do not just struggle for, everyone says establish justice. And Quran says, of course, establish justice. But that's foundational. Justice is the primer and most fundamental level of social engagement that has to be there for a community to thrive. If a community wants to flourish, justice is the foundational level. If you don't have justice, you won't have anything after that. Islam doesn't establish only justice though. Islam wants to establish virtue. What is the example of that? Of course, justice is if someone hurts you, you can hurt them back. If someone cuts your hand, you have the right to cut their hand back. If someone curses you, you can curse them back. This is part of the justice system, of course. But what is virtue? When Allah Ta'ala tells us a virtue, what's better? What does He say? Forgiveness is better. Forgiveness is virtue. And where do we learn virtue from? We learn it from the being of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the metric for character and akhlaq and ethics and virtuous character and virtue development, that metric ends at the superiority of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He is the highest level of that metric, the highest level of that spectrum. The next ayah now moves on. The rest of the surah will have a more general discussion. And this next ayah specifically is a very, very beautiful ayah, and a very, an ayah that people will quote a lot for the reason of the generality and the way that it speaks to all of mankind. Allah Ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. Inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. Inna Allaha 'alimun khabir. Now, because in the past ayah Allah Ta'ala spoke about that stay away from these things and do not try to make fun of each other in which you belittle each other, or that you backbite each other, or that you point out the faults of each other. Allah Ta'ala then takes us to the etiquettes of dealing with the whole world, the whole human community, all of civilization, all of people. That Ya ayyuhan nas, this is a speech given now to all people, that we have created all of you from a single male and female. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. Some of the scholars would say, what does it mean we created you from one specific male and female? That you all come from your father Adam and your mother Hawa alayhi salatu wasalam. And so you guys are you are all like brothers and sisters. So don't think any of you are better than the others. Those are all on the same level, same platform. Some of the other scholars will say that the community is created from dhakar and untha. The community is created from this binary gender, that there is male or female, there isn't a third, there isn't any other. It's a binary. In dhakar wa untha, male and female. The first building blocks of the human community. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا. And then we made you into shu'ub, comes from shu'ba, which is like the branch of a tree. And the beauty of the branches of a tree is that some of them are longer, some of them are different in the way that they're shaped perhaps, but they all come from one trunk. Meaning, you as human beings are very different. You will have a lot of diversity, but you still come from one trunk, meaning you share many things. You share an intellect, you share a physical body, and you share many human like qualities. وَقَبَائِل. And then a grander form, shu'ub is smaller, so it could be considered subcategories or subdivisions, sub-tribes. وَقَبَائِل, and then greater, bigger tribes. Of course, the Quran, what does it come? It comes to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and the community of the Sahaba and the community of that time first. So it's the social, political geography which is being given to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ is according to the Arabian Peninsula at that time, that they were of qaba'il, they were of tribes. What was the reality of their social relations at that time? They had social classes. And the aristocrats, the highest of those classes, they were the Quraysh. They were the Quraysh. And then below them you had several other tribes. So they had this class system. And the lowest of them were the slaves. The lowest of the people were the slaves. Now, what is the beauty that Islam brought? What is the beauty that this ayah brings to us? That even if socially there is a difference amongst you, even if socially, which there will be differences, there are different classes, there will always be different classes of wealthy versus non-wealthy people. There will always be different classes of people, but everyone will be treated the same. Islam establishes this, that the legal system for everyone is the same. The Messenger of Allah said, O Fatima radiallahu anha, even if my daughter, even if you were to commit theft, then even the hand of Fatima radiallahu anha, Az-Zahra radiallahu anha, the leader of the women of Jannah, that even you would be summoned and your hand would have to be taken into account. Everyone is equal in the court of a Muslim society. So this is how Islam first establishes a level of human equality. I don't want to use the word equality. Why? Because when we study the Quran, we don't want to use social and political words. It's very important, because social and political words are tied to certain ideas. And when we study the Quran, we're not trying to learn ideas that we already know, or we're learning from other books and other sciences or subjects. We're learning wahy. We're learning the revelation of Allah. So it's first important to, and this is important with anything that seems to us, oh, this could also have a connection to this science, or that science, or this subject, or that study. No, this is first Quran. This is first revelation. This is first wahy. First understand it the way the Messenger of Allah conveyed it to the people, how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum understood it, and then you can expand upon that. Then you can expand upon that. So in the society at that time you had different classes. The lowest of those classes was the slaves, and the slaves were not given their rights. They did not have rights. They were not given their basic, what a human deserves. They were not given those necessities. And so when was this ayah revealed? When the Messenger of Allah returned for the conquest of Makkah, and they were what's known as the Fath Makkah, the conquest of Makkah. And the Messenger of Allah commanded Bilal radiallahu anhu, who was a slave and who was Habashi. He commanded him to ascend the Kaaba and now to perform adhan. And some of the people who were newly now seeing this, they said, if my father was here, he would have never been able to see this. It's a blessing that my father was protected from ever seeing this day. That a Habashi is coming, who was a slave, and he's coming on top of the Kaaba, and he is performing the adhan. Some of them even came together and they complained. They went to Abu Sufyan. They said, Abu Sufyan, what is this? What is going on? Tell them to take him down. This is a disgrace to the Kaaba. This is a disgrace to the land led by the Quraysh. Abu Sufyan said, I cannot say anything. If I say anything, Allah will punish me. Abu Sufyan had accepted Islam already. They said, Allah Ta'ala will punish me if I say anything. So this was the fact that Allah Ta'ala's Messenger ﷺ, why did he specifically choose Bilal radiallahu anhu, go on top of the Kaaba and then go on and then give the adhan? What, the call of Islam, that come to success, come to the prayer. This was to establish this idea that there is no la fadla li arabin ala ajami wa la aswad ala ahmar. There is no virtue, as the Messenger of Allah said in the khutbah to Hajjat al-Wada', that there is no virtue of a Arabi over a Ajami, or a Ajami over a Arabi, or a black person over a white person, or a white person over a black person, except with illa bil-taqwa, as the ayah then also explains. And we'll go into that right after. But humans in their nature, they have, humans have nothing over the other. This is very important. Humans have always tried to leverage certain qualities, whether it was beauty, whether it was mal. And I'll bring a little discussion just because Imam Zayd Sharief talks about it. That why is it that the Arabs at the time, and for the most part people of the past, something we don't care about anymore, but why did they care so much about nasab, lineage? And why was lineage the most important quality, even more than wealth? Why? Because wealth, a poor person could become wealthy, a wealthy person could become poor. Beauty can go with time, strength can go with time. But lineage, this is not something, number one, anyone could gain with iktisab. You cannot acquire it. It's something given, which makes it more specific. It makes it more specific. Because a quality which is wahbi, which is, genetic, or someone has it, is different than a quality which is acquired. So the quality of lineage, why did they like it so much? Why? Because it is not an acquired quality and it cannot be acquired. So if a person has a specific lineage, then that is specific to that people and those people. This is why they held on to lineage that much. But of course, from an Islamic perspective as well, then lineage does not hold any value. A kafir could have a very high lineage, and a believer could have a very low lineage from a social class or whatever perspective. However, the believer we know is more righteous. We know that the believer has a higher rate. Why? Because what is the spectrum? What is the measure? Allah Ta'ala said, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That the most noble of you in the sight of Allah are those who are most fearing of Allah. Why did Allah Ta'ala create us in diversity? Allah Ta'ala mentions a benefit. لِتَعَارَفُوا. Lam is to always mention a fa'idah, a benefit, for this reason. لِتَعَارَفُوا. So that you may come to know one another. What is this coming to know one another? This is to learn from each other, to benefit from each other, to know about the different languages, and that all of these are ayat. In another place in the Quran, مِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. That it is from His signs that He created the sky and the earth, and your different colors and your different languages. These are all from the signs of Allah Ta'ala, right? So لِتَعَارَفُوا. So what the diversity was actually supposed to be a blessing. And so where a community that establishes, each individual establishes this idea that it doesn't matter where we're from or what color we are, what language we speak, that we are in reality all the same. The only spectrum is taqwa, and taqwa is something hidden in the heart. So even that then, what was the measure, to a great degree, most of it is hidden, so we cannot say who's better or what's better, right? But it was supposed to be for the benefit of getting to know each other. There's a positive reason for this. Allah Ta'ala is trying to tell us there's a positive reason for this. So a community who understands this, they will be able to leverage this diversity for a blessing, for a good reason. And a community that doesn't understand this foundationally, individually, then they can put whatever legal laws to protect each other's rights, etc. Then things like systemic racism will come about. They will come about. If this foundational moral of who we are and what we are, what is mankind, what is the human being, is not understood, and what is the benefit of this diversity, then no law can then continue to protect the rights of mankind. لِتَعَارَفُوا. To know each other, to learn about each other. So this is a benefit. Allah Ta'ala says in another place. So over here Allah Ta'ala is saying you're diverse, you're different, and this is beneficial. This is good. In another place Allah Ta'ala tells us, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَ النَّاسَ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَلَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ. That, and if Allah Ta'ala wished, He could have made you one people. one madhab, one manhaj, one religion, right? One religion, but they would still differ. They would still differ. Partially, why? Because it is a part of nature that we differ. And difference doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. The Messenger of Allah, as he said it in the Sahih Muslim, اختلاف أمتي رحمة, that the difference of my ummah, my people, specifically the Muslim ummah, if the etiquettes of ikhtilaf and differing with each other, they are understood and they are established, and people establish tolerance, then that ikhtilaf can actually be a very big blessing. That ikhtilaf can be actually a very big blessing. So Allah Ta'ala says, we could have made you one people and you would still differ. Why? Because negative differences amongst yourselves, where does it come from? Right? One thing is the difference that we see outside of ourselves, the difference that our eyes are seeing or we're talking about, that difference. And then there's another difference, which is how am I interpreting that difference? How am I approaching that difference? How is my heart understanding that difference? So, if we differ in our salah, an example for us as Muslims in the masjid, if one person is putting their hand here, or if one person is raising their hand after takbirah, if one person is praying a little bit different, right? But if your hearts are aligned, that the fact that you're standing in one saf, and that you understand the greater maqsad of this, the greater maqsad, which is what? لِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ فَإِنَّمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. That Allah Ta'ala owns the east and the west, and wherever you face, you are facing Allah Ta'ala. If you understand this greater picture, this grander moral, then the differences become very small. And you actually learn to love each other even more. And in specific, there are great examples. We know that there were Imams of the past, they differed with each other, and rightfully so. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, when he prayed near the grave of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he said, I'm praying, and out of respect, I'm going to pray according to the way he prayed. This was respect, this was love. Right? We think that the differences actually are these, small differences. Oh, why did they have differences? Why are there differences? This is actually a bad thing. And I won't go too much into the detail of this subject. Why? Because in order really to understand this, there are several principles you need to understand. Right? One of the scholars, he said that a person who doesn't understand the difference, لَمْ يَشُمَّ أَنْفُهُ الْفِقْهِ. Then the reality of the deep understanding of practice in the deen, his nose hasn't even smelled it, meaning he hasn't even come near it. The science of ikhtilaf is a long science, and to understand it, it requires a lot of time, and it requires a lot of study. My only request to myself and everyone is, before we say anything about the difference, learn about it. Learn about the history. Learn about the etiquette. Learn about the academia, the intellect behind it. Learn about the taqwa behind it, how much taqwa they had. They didn't just establish opinions because they wanted to, a lot of the scholars of the past. There's a lot of taqwa behind this. There was a lot of taqwa behind. And then you can see historically how Allah Ta'ala accepted many opinions. How Allah Ta'ala showed that those opinions, they were preserved in the ummah. They were preserved in the ummah. And how they come from the same pool, the same water of Quran and Hadith. And they all connect back. And again, that's a lengthy subject. But لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that you may know each other. The differences amongst yourself can actually be a very big blessing if you learn to tolerate it. If you learn to have a pure heart to each other. If you'll practice the things which were mentioned before, that do not have suspicions, bad suspicions, do not have bad thoughts. These things can be a great blessing to the community. And then, إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. Now that you have recognized that you are all equal, as human beings, there is something which will create tafadul, difference between you, which will raise some of you and lower some of you, but that measure is coming from an outer being. It's not coming from amongst you. You need that to come from somewhere outside. Where is that coming from? That's coming from Allah. He chooses. He is the judge. He is the judge, and what is the measure that He judges by? It's taqwa. It's taqwa. And taqwa is, as the Messenger of Allah said, it's from the secrets, just like there's an hour of Jum'ah, there's Laylatul Qadr, these are those things which are secrets. The taqwa in the qalb, in the heart, is a secret. And what is the lowest level of taqwa? as some of the scholars they mentioned in Tafseer, to describe the lowest level of taqwa. The lowest level of taqwa is that a person accepts Islam and affirms Islam in their life. This is the lowest level of taqwa. As it says in the hadith, that a person will come on the day of resurrection and his sins will be like the mountains of Tahama on the scale. And then he'll bring a small card and he will put that small card on the other side of the scale. On that card will be written La ilaha illallah. When that card will be placed on the other side of the scale, then the other side of the scale, which was mountains of sins, they will fly haba'an manthura. They will fly in the dust. So the greatest or the most foundational level of taqwa, of being a muttaqi, is that a person is a Muslim, accepts Islam, Iman, and that then they affirm it with their tongue. This is the lowest level of taqwa. When one of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, the story was told to the Messenger of Allah that a person in front of him in the battlefield who was a disbeliever he tried to save himself, so he said, I accept Islam. And he said, La ilaha illallah. But he still attacked him, and he still took his life. So then when this was told to the Messenger of Allah, he actually got very angry. What did he say? Halla shaqaqta an qalbi? What did you open his chest? Did you see his heart? Did you see what was inside of there? Now think about it like this. On the battlefield, in the heat of the battlefield, Allah Ta'ala, the Messenger of Allah wants you, who's going to stop right before they're going to strike? But the Messenger of Allah is saying, why didn't you stop? In the heat of the battlefield. Why didn't you stop? Even if the person was making an excuse. So if a person has if you can give a person the benefit of doubt of any sign of taqwa, give them the benefit of that. Give them the sign of taqwa. You can see any sign of taqwa in them, find that sign of taqwa and consider that person muttaqi. Consider that person a person of taqwa. This is a very good thing. This is a good thing to do. Inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. The most noble of you by Allah Ta'ala are those who are most fearing of Him. The most fearing of you, fearing of Allah amongst you, those are the most noble of people. Inna Allah alimun khabir. And indeed, Allah is all-knowing. So He knows your diversity. He knows the tribes that you come from. He knows your qualities. He knows who you are. He knows what you are. And then He knows the innermost sir, the innermost secret, which is the faith of a person or the disbelief of a person, which it remains in the heart. And Allah Ta'ala knows of all of this, and He is khabir, He is all aware. He is khabir, He is all aware. He has tested the hearts. He knows the essence and the inner depths and secrets of mankind. So we'll conclude with this, and then we'll continue the rest of the passage, inshallah ta'ala, next week. But ayat, they very beautifully summarize so many things related to our social realities and the perspective of how a Muslim should understand. This is very important, because people will say equality, people will say social justice. Oh, Muslims also believe in social justice. Muslims also believe in equality. But this is something very important to understand. Even, for example, someone says, oh, I believe in Jesus. Muslims also believe in Jesus. The word also has to be very careful. Why? Because Muslims don't just also believe in Jesus or Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, but they have an Islamic view of him. The way we know him is through the Prophet ﷺ. The way we know equality is through the Prophet ﷺ. The way we know social justice is through the Prophet ﷺ. Remember that. There is an Islamic vision for everything. And it's important that Muslims understand that and recognize that. May Allah Ta'ala grant us understanding of this, and grant us deeper and better understanding of this, and forgive us for any of our shortcomings in attempting to understand it. And may He grant us the practice of His word. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. صدق الله العظيم. سبحانك وبحمدك سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك اللهم وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.